Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the craziness going on in between the ACC and Florida State. They are currently battling out in the courts to see if Florida State can get out of their grant of rights deal. And now we're going to talk about a little bit of a coaching crisis going on in college football. But before we get into that, I do want to remind you that we get a ton of different tips throughout the show. We get a ton of different questions, and the best way to get your questions seen on screen and answered as quickly as possible is to use the link down below, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It is a huge help not only to us, but to you all to see what you ask on the screen, and I can get to it as quickly as possible. So if you use that function, you can definitely get your question answered and possibly have, a fun little back and forth here. But let's jump back into what has been kind of an interesting little time in college football. A lot of different problems popping up around the sport. A lot of people not having a ton of optimism in terms of the future of the sport. And there have been times where I've been among that group, and I'm not necessarily going to help those beliefs right now, but I will try to subside a little bit of worry towards the end of this segment. But let's jump right in, because we've had a ton of coaches find their way either to the NFL or to the SEC and the Big Ten, leaving behind what seemed like bigger, better jobs in a lot of ways. And we'll start with the guys going to the NFL. Obviously, we had Jeff Hafley leave Boston College to take over the defensive coordinator position at the Green Bay Packers. Brian McClendon, a really, really talented wide receiver coach at Georgia, has left to join the Buccaneers. Also, Liam Cohen has joined the Buccaneers as their OC, leaving Kentucky, who had in the past been the Rams OC, so not quite as surprising there, but still something to keep a track of. And then obviously Ryan Grubb taking the job back up in Seattle after what was probably about 5 seconds living in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But tons of guys have been leaving for the NFL, and I think it's a very interesting feeling when people are leaving to go to the NFL to have a better work-life balance. There have been a lot of guys that have been a little bit turned off in recent years to just the amount of work that goes into being a college football coach. Now, obviously, they get paid pretty handsomely to do that work, but there's only so many hours in a day, and more money does not buy you more time, and there are times of the year where coaches are just up against it. Particularly December has been kind of the poster child for how kind of broken the schedule and the structure of college football has been over the last couple of years. December is an absolute nightmare for coaches in a lot of ways. They have to recruit high school kids. They have to recruit the transfer portal. They have to recruit their own kids, which is something that not as many people talk about, but you have to keep your own kids in the building now. There's no longer this ability to just show up to practice and know that all of your guys are going to be there, because tons of stuff is happening behind the scenes with NIL and the transfer portal, and some teams not, adhering to certain rules that are in place with the transfer portal. So there's a lot of things that they have to do just in terms of roster management. And then you get into coaching. Then you get into preparing for a bowl game, going through bowl practices, dealing with the media days for all of that stuff, travel, all of these different things around bowl season that just put coaches in a really, really bad spot, at least to do their job to the best of their ability, because everything culminates in that last couple of months of the season, right? Obviously, November is huge high-pressure games where they're working crazy hours to make sure their team has any type of edge. They're hosting kids on weekends, on visits. They're doing tons of stuff during the back end of the season. And then we get to December, and they have a chance to, at least they should have a chance to breathe for a second. If you didn't make a bowl game, you should be able to have a second to figure out what the next step is for your team. There are a lot of teams going through transition, and it's insane that a guy that has just finished the season, has just finished the incredible grind that this 12 or 13 games is through September to November, that then they have to go through what is the most grueling month in all of the sport. I think if you asked pretty much any coach out there, they would tell you they much prefer September and October to December when it comes to coaching this sport, because at the end of the day, at least in September, October, when they're doing recruiting and all of this different type of stuff, they get to coach football a lot of the times. And in December, that's a little bit fewer and further between. And I think it's been a really frustrating thing for coaches. So the NFL has looked like a very viable option for the future of their career. And obviously, going up to the NFL is never a bad idea. Obviously, it's the highest level of football, and there are plenty of coaches that just want to be NFL coaches. So it's not to say that all of these guys were definitely going to stay in college football if they, if this structure and scheduling was changed. But there are tons of guys that would have at least been a part of the future of this sport in a lot of ways. Brian McClendon being one of them. I think he would have been a huge Ryan Grubb, another one. All of these guys that are uber talented football coaches and have a chance to be head coaches in college football in the future and be kind of the next generation of great coaches are leaving because it's kind of unsustainable to be any type of coach in college football at the moment, especially a higher level, whether that's Jeff Hafley as a head coach or Ryan Grubb as an OC or Liam Cohen as an OC. There's a lot on these guys' shoulders, especially around this time of year. So when those job offers from the Seahawks or from the Buccaneers or from the Packers start rolling in, it's hard to say no. With all of this stuff happening around you, working pretty much 16-hour days no matter what, probably more than that, to be totally honest with you. It's just, it's an unfair thing to expect these coaches to pull off. And obviously, they're in a very advantageous position that a lot of us would trade with them immediately. But the reality is, I don't think a lot of us understand what that reality actually is. They go into work way too early. They leave work way too late. They spend way too little time with their family. And it's something that just has to be fixed at least the best it can. Obviously, when you coach elite level football, if you want to be elite in this sport, especially in today's world of fundraising and transfer portal and everything else, you're going to have to work a lot. There's no two ways about that. Every coach would tell you that. But every coach would also tell you there are ways to create a better environment for them to do their job effectively. I think one of the biggest ones would be just having one signing day in February, make that the main event again, instead of having two signing days and creating this absolute gold rush essentially in December and late November that takes a lot away from the actual football being played. And it goes back to a lot of people devaluing what bowl games mean to a lot of people, and it creates problems when you look at not only the bowl game, marketability and viewership and all of that type of stuff, but also bowl games are a lot of what make this sport incredible, right? There are different things that I know a lot of people this past year loved the Pop-Tart Bowl. So did I. It was incredible. And I think that's part of what makes all of this sport just awesome. There's so many different sides of it. There's so many different layers to it. And we're slowly kind of losing those layers because of all of the different stuff that has been introduced. And it goes back to a lot of teams wanting to leave their conference. It's slowly stripping away certain parts of this sport that make it unique and make it specific and make me love it in a lot of ways. So obviously not the greatest thing when you're losing names like Ryan Grubb, like Liam Cohen, like Jeff Hafley, but also there are tons of people, and this goes back to the conference thing, there are tons of people that are finding their way to the SEC or the Big Ten because it's the steady ship, right? There are tons of conferences out there that don't really know what their future holds. And the main example of this recently in a coach leaving for a position that they used to not leave for is Sean Elliott, the head coach of Georgia State, leaving to be the tight end coach and run game coordinator at South Carolina. Now, there is some extenuating circumstances here. It is apparently his family has been living in Colombia for the past several years, and he would like to spend more time with them. Obviously, cannot knock a man for that. There is no issue with that by any means, of course, but it is something to watch. This is not something that used to happen. A head coach of a G5 program leaving to be a position coach or run game coordinator at a bigger conference. And another example of this would be Maurice Lindquist leaving the head coaching job at Buffalo to be the DB coach and co-defensive coordinator, which definitely plays a part in all of this, at Alabama. But it's a differing landscape more and more, and I think coaches are taking note of that. The coaches in the Sun Belt, in the MAC, in Conference USA, wherever it is, are slowly realizing they have very little control over what the future looks like for not only them, but for their program, for their kids, for a lot of different aspects in their life. And they look around and see a sinking ship and see the SEC and the Big Ten, continuing to rise in all of this, and say, why not, take a lower job in terms of title, in terms of decision making, but be on a steady ship. Be on a ship that I can slowly work my way up the ranks. Possibly, if you're a good coach, you're gonna find a way to get a bigger job and a bigger job and a bigger job, right? So, all these guys, Maurice Lindquist, Sean Elliott, both those guys, very talented coaches, and they both had head coaching jobs. So it's interesting to see them give up that position to just be in a place of stability and at least know that, when you come to work in 2025 or 2026, there's still going to be a conference there. There's still going to be teams to play. There's still going to be, people watching. So it is not what I want for the sport. It's not what a lot of people want for the sport, but it's kind of the reality at this point. It takes away a lot of the tiering of this sport, because obviously there is a big gap between the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else. There's a big gap between even the Big 12 and the ACC and the Sun Belt and the MAC and all of that. And I fully understand that. The level of play at the MAC level is not the same as the SEC, and there's no two ways about that. But watching the MAC on Tuesday and seeing really good players come across your screen is part of what makes the sport great. Seeing really good coaches make their way from the MAC level, from the NAIA level, up to a Power 5 job is part of what makes the sport great. And it could be something that doesn't necessarily fully go away, but we could see coaches leaving those levels even sooner and becoming position coaches at these bigger places like Sean Elliott did, and slowly work their way up the ranks because they're plenty talented coaches. Why not be in a stable situation where you can, get a job within that conference instead of fighting tooth and nail just to kind of stay alive in your own. So there is a lot of worry, obviously, in the coaching area and in college football today. NIL and the transfer portal have created a ton of worry around college football fans, but I tend to believe all of this will be worked out. Now, I don't know how soon that'll be. I don't know necessarily how great the final result will be. I think it'll be two big conferences in a lot of ways. It will be the SEC and the Big Ten kind of gobbling up the whole sport in some ways. But I do think at some point there will be people that come along that actually have the sport's best interests at heart, and care about the sanctity of what makes the sport special, which in some ways is tradition, and in some ways is the regionality of this sport, and keeping some things in conferences the same. Leaving money out of it, which is a problem, in the sports world in general, and seeing it from a fan's perspective that doesn't get a cut of these checks by any means. So there's tons to still happen around college football. There's tons that will happen, in the next couple of weeks with regard to all of this. But I tend to believe there are people out there that see what's happening and will take over at some point, and it'll be interesting to see who those people are and what their ideas are. But I do think there are enough people out there that see the problems that are happening in college football and want to fix them. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. But we're going to stop talking about the morbid parts of this sport real quick. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to break down the best coaching hires of this cycle in college football. Definitely a couple of guys that really, really stand out. So stick with us, and we will be right back.